Zuwaira was just 21, full of dreams and hope, when she married Bello, a well-known teacher in her village near Makurdi. Everyone said she was lucky. Bello was respected, educated, and seemed kind. In the beginning, it felt like a fairy tale. He smiled a lot, praised her beauty, and promised to take care of her forever. But soon after the wedding, things changed. Bello's smiles faded. His love turned cold. He began to control everything Zuwaira did. She wasn't allowed to visit her friends or talk to anyone without his permission. Even small things like laughing too loud or stepping outside became reasons for his anger. He would look at her with cold eyes and say, "You are mine. You obey." Zuwaira felt trapped inside her own home. The girl who once dreamed of a happy life now lived in silence, walking on eggshells every day. She couldn't tell anyone. Bello made sure she stayed quiet, afraid, and alone. What was meant to be the happiest time of her life had become a dark, lonely prison. And still, no one outside knew what was happening behind the closed doors of their home. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening. Zuwaira had cooked Bello's favorite soup, just like he always wanted. But after one spoonful, he slammed his hand on the table. "Too much salt," he growled. Her heart jumped. She quickly apologized, her hands shaking. But Bello was already standing, his eyes burning with anger. Without another word, he grabbed her wrist and dragged her outside like a rag doll. The sun was setting, and the neighbors were outside, some chatting, some sweeping, some just watching. Zuwaira begged him to stop, but Bello didn't listen. He pushed her down in the dirt, tied her hands, and fastened her to a tree in front of their house. Her wrapper had torn. Her knees were scraped. And still, he shouted, "This is how we discipline animals. Crawl, like the dog you are." Then he did something worse. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of her, humiliated and tied up, like she was not human at all. Zuwaira didn't cry. Her tears had dried up long ago. She didn't scream. She just looked straight ahead, her eyes cold and silent. But inside her heart, something cracked, and something else woke up. As the neighbors stood and watched, some whispering, some even laughing, she didn't forget. She memorized every face. Every smirk. Every chuckle. Every neighbor who saw her pain and did nothing. They had seen her worst moment, and they chose silence. That silence was loud. And Zuwaira felt it like a knife. The rope around her wrists burned her skin, but what burned more was the shame. Still, she kept her head low and quiet. Not because she was weak, but because she was thinking. Inside, she was planning. Something in her changed that day. It was not just the hurt or the shame. It was the realization that if she stayed, this would never stop. If she wanted to live, really live, she had to get out. Not just run, but rise. Her body was tied, but her mind started breaking free. That night, long after Bello had untied her and gone inside as if nothing had happened, Zuwaira sat quietly on the cold floor. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She just stared at the wall. The girl who once hoped for love was gone. In her place now was a woman who had seen too much, felt too much, and had made a silent promise to herself, "This will never happen again." That day was the lowest point of her life. But sometimes, the lowest point becomes the place where strength is born. Zuwaira didn't know how yet. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was the breaking point. And something deep inside her had finally snapped, not in fear, but in courage. That night, the house was quiet. The only sound was Bello's loud snoring from the bedroom. He had drunk too much again, like he always did when he thought he had one. Zuwaira sat on the floor, her wrists still sore from the rope. Her body ached, but her mind was clear. She looked at the door. It was unlocked. For the first time in a long time, there was no fear, only a whisper inside her, "Go." Slowly, carefully, she stood up. Her legs were weak, her feet bare, but she didn't stop. Every step felt like walking through fire, but freedom was calling. She pushed the door open and stepped into the night. The village was asleep. The moon lit her path. She limped through back roads and narrow paths, away from anyone who might see her. She didn't know where to go at first, but then she remembered someone, Mama Talatu. An old herbalist who had once treated her secretly when Bello had hit her too hard. People called Mama strange, but Zuwaira remembered her kindness. She hoped, prayed, and dragged herself to Mama's small, quiet house at the edge of the village. Mama Talatu opened the door in one look. No questions. No shock. Just soft eyes and open arms. "I've been waiting for this day," she said, helping Zuwaira inside. Zuwaira fell into her arms and broke down for the first time. Not because she was weak, but because she was finally safe. Mama sat her down, cleaned her wounds with gentle hands, and gave her warm food. Then, she reached into a basket and pulled out something small but powerful, a mobile phone. "Take it," Mama said. "Call someone who can help you. You don't go back. Not this time." Zuwaira held the phone like it was gold. Her hands shook. Her lips trembled. No one had ever given her a way out before. Not just a phone, not just food, but belief. Mama looked at her and said, "You are not what he called you. You are not a dog. You are a warrior. And warriors rise." Zuwaira didn't sleep that night. She sat in a corner with a blanket around her shoulders, clutching the phone and staring at it. Her heart was full of fear, but also full of something new, hope. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, someone believed in her. She was no longer just a broken wife. She was a woman with a plan. She didn't know exactly what would happen next. But she knew one thing clearly: she was not going back to suffer. She was going to fight. And thanks to Mama Talatu, she now had the first weapon in her hand, a phone. A lifeline. A door out of the dark. Zuwaira held the phone tight in her hand the next morning. Her fingers hovered over the buttons. Fear whispered, "What if he finds you?" But courage shouted louder, "Now is the time." She dialed a number Mama Talatu had given her. It connected to a woman's rights office in Abuja. Soon, she was speaking to someone calm and strong, Inspector Naji. His voice didn't rush. He didn't doubt her. He simply said, "You're safe now. And we will help you fight." Zuwaira was taken to Abuja the next day. It was her first time in the big city, and everything felt strange: the traffic, the tall buildings, the noise. But inside her, something steady was growing. At the Human Rights Center, Inspector Naji and his team welcomed her like family. They didn't see a broken woman. They saw a survivor. Someone who had made it out. And they were ready to stand by her. Day by day, they began to build her case. Zuwaira gave them every detail. The pictures Bello had taken of her tied to the tree. They became evidence. The scars on her skin, medical reports were written. The neighbors who had laughed, some were willing to talk now, afraid of being caught in the storm that was coming. Every small thing, every hurtful memory, every silent tear, now became a piece of the case. But Zuwaira didn't just sit and wait. She trained herself. She met with counselors who helped her heal inside. She started reading and journaling, learning to speak clearly, to hold her head up, to answer questions with strength. She took classes to understand her rights. She prayed more deeply than ever, and each prayer made her stronger. Slowly, the girl who had once been quiet and afraid began to transform into a woman who looked people in the eye. "I'm not going back to survive," she told Inspector Naji one day, "I'm going back to win." He smiled and nodded. "Then let's prepare for victory." There were hard days. Days she felt tired and broken again. Nights when Bello's voice echoed in her mind, shouting insults. But each time she felt weak, she reminded herself, he thinks I'm nothing. He thinks I'm done. But he doesn't know, I'm building a case. I'm building myself. Months passed. The case grew stronger. Witnesses were lined up. Documents were ready. Zuwaira practiced what she would say in court, not as a victim, but as a fighter. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had faced fire, and now she was walking back into it, not with fear, but with fire in her own eyes. Every step she took now was not for revenge, but for justice. For the girl she once was. For the other women still trapped. For the silence that needed to be broken. And with every file stacked on that desk, every truth spoken out loud, Zuwaira was no longer just preparing for court. She was preparing for freedom. The courtroom was full. People came from the village, the city, and even nearby towns. Some came out of curiosity. Others came to support. Bello walked in with pride, wearing a clean shirt and a fake smile. He looked around and laughed quietly, like everything was still under his control. He didn't believe she would really bring him to court. In his mind, Zuwaira was still the quiet, scared girl he used to order around. But that girl was gone. Then Zuwaira entered. The room went silent. She wore a beautiful Ankara gown, bright colors, bold patterns, and a matching head wrap that made her look like a queen. Her back was straight, her eyes focused, and her steps calm. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at him. Bello's smile faded a little. The judge called the case. Zuwaira stepped forward. Her voice was clear, soft but strong. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply told her story. What happened in the house, what happened that night by the tree, the years of pain, fear, and silence. She showed them everything, the photo of her tied to the tree, the medical reports, the scars that had faded but not disappeared. Yes, she said, pointing, that's the rope he used on me. Bello tried to laugh it off. He shook his head and muttered, she's lying. But the judge didn't laugh. No one did. The evidence was strong. And then the neighbors started to speak. One by one, they took the stand. Some said they were sorry. Others admitted they were afraid to speak before. But now they confirmed everything Zuwaira had said. They had seen it. And now, they were saying it out loud, in front of everyone. Bello began to sweat. He shifted in his seat, pulled at his collar, looked around the room for a way out. But there was none. Zuwaira stared straight at him, her head high, her face calm. She had no hate in her eyes. Just truth. Pure, unstoppable truth. The court listened. The judge took notes. The lawyers asked questions. And through it all, Zuwaira stayed strong. Not once did she look away. Not once did she tremble. She had trained for this moment. She had cried all her tears long ago. Now, she stood in power, not just for herself, but for every woman who had been hurt, silenced, or ignored. When she stepped down from the witness stand, the room stayed silent. Not because they were unsure, but because they were in awe. Zuwaira had walked into that courtroom not as a victim, but as a voice. And by the end of the day, everyone knew, justice was coming. Bello was no longer the man in control. He was the man being seen for who he really was. And Zuwaira? She was finally being seen too, not as a broken woman, but as a brave one. The courtroom was silent as everyone waited for the judge to speak. Zuwaira sat calmly, hands folded on her lap, her heart steady. Bello, on the other side, looked nervous for the first time. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't pretending to be proud. His eyes darted around the room, sweat rolling down his face. All the confidence he once had was gone. The judge cleared his throat, looked straight at Bello, and began to speak. He talked about justice, about pain, about the responsibility of the court to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And then, in a strong, clear voice, the judge said, "You are sentenced to 15 years in prison." For a second, everything froze. Bello's face went pale. His mouth dropped open. Then he began to cry. Real, loud, messy crying. He fell to his knees and begged, "Please, please, forgive me. I was angry. I didn't mean it." But it was too late. The guards moved toward him. His hands were cuffed. His head was low. All the power he had once used to hurt Zuwaira was now gone. He would no longer walk free. He would now live in a small cell, far from the people he once controlled. Zuwaira didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply stood up and walked out of the courtroom with quiet dignity. Her steps were strong. Her head was high. As she stepped outside, she was met with a crowd of women's rights activists holding signs, clapping, and cheering for her bravery. Cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. Some women reached out to hug her. Others just cried softly, moved by her strength. But Zuwaira stayed calm. She looked ahead, her eyes shining with peace. One reporter asked, "What do you want to say now that justice has been served?" Zuwaira looked into the camera and said, "Let him bark now." Her voice was soft, but the message was loud. The man who once called her a dog was now in a cage himself. The man who once made her crawl was now the one on his knees. He had treated her like an animal. Now, he would see how animals are treated in prison. No more control. No more fear. That day, Zuwaira didn't just walk out of court, she walked into a new life. A free life. One where she was no longer a victim, but a survivor. Her pain had not broken her. It had built her. And now, she was ready to help others, to speak, to shine. The chains that once held her were gone. And the world finally saw her, not as a woman who was tied up, but as a woman who broke free. Her voice was clear. Her story was powerful. And her journey was far from over. Zuwaira didn't stop after the court case. She knew her story was bigger than just her pain. She wanted to help other women who were still suffering in silence. So, she started an NGO called Leash Breakers, a name that meant freedom. It was for wives who had been abused, silenced, or trapped just like she once was. She traveled across Benue State, meeting women in villages, towns, and cities. She listened to their stories, cried with them, and gave them hope. She shared her own journey, how she had escaped, how she had fought back, and how she had won. And every time she spoke, women stood a little taller. They felt seen. They felt strong. Zuwaira trained women on how to protect themselves, where to go for help, how to report abuse, and most importantly, how to believe in themselves again. Her story spread fast. News channels interviewed her. Social media carried her message to places she had never even visited. People didn't talk about her because she was once tied to a tree. They talked about her because she untied herself and made sure the man who hurt her faced justice. She had gone from victim to voice, from silence to speaker, from pain to purpose. And everywhere she went, she reminded others, "You are not weak. You are not alone. And you can break free too." Zuwaira had broken the leash, and now she was helping others do the same.